For roughly 99% of human history, your ancestors didn't have a meal schedule. They had a world. A vast, indifferent, occasionally generous world that offered food unpredictably. A successful hunt here, a berry thicket there, long stretches of nothing in between. And through millions of years of brutal evolutionary pressure, the human body didn't just survive this uncertainty. It became exquisitely engineered for it. It learned to dance between feast and famine with the elegance of a machine optimized for geological timescales. Every cell in your body carries the memory of that dance. Then, roughly 10,000 years ago, agriculture arrived. Food became reliable. Then, 60 years ago, it became relentless. Ultra-processed, hyper-palatable, available at every gas station and airport at every hour of every day. The dance didn't stop, but the music changed completely. And your cells are still listening for the old song. This isn't a video about a diet trend. This is a video about a fundamental biological mismatch, one that plays out on a molecular level inside your body, right now, while you watch this. And once you understand what's actually happening in your cells when you eat, when you don't eat, and when you try to stop eating, you'll never think about hunger the same way again. Let's talk about your metabolism, and to do that, we need a model. Imagine your body as a city, a vast, impossibly complex city of 37 trillion citizens, your cells, each of whom needs a constant supply of energy to do their jobs. To power this city, you have a grid, and that grid runs primarily on one fuel: glucose, sugar, the universal energy currency of cellular life. When you eat a meal, your digestive system dismantles it into its molecular components and floods the bloodstream with glucose. This is the grid receiving a power surge. The pancreas detects the surge and releases insulin, a hormone whose job is essentially that of an infrastructure manager. Insulin opens the gates of your cells, letting glucose flow in to be burned for energy. Anything the city can't immediately use gets packed away. First into glycogen stores in the liver and muscle, like short-term battery reserves. And then, when those are full, converted into fat, the long-term fuel tanks buried deep in the infrastructure. This is a perfectly brilliant system. It kept your ancestors alive through winters. But here's the problem. When you eat every 2 to 3 hours, when you snack constantly, graze perpetually, the grid never goes offline. Insulin is perpetually circulating. The fat tanks are perpetually being filled and never being drawn from. And over months, years, decades of this pattern, something insidious happens. Your city forgets it even has an alternative fuel system. On a molecular level, the enzymes and proteins responsible for metabolizing fat become sluggish from disuse. The mitochondria, your cell's power generators, lose their ability to efficiently switch fuel sources. Scientists call this condition reduced metabolic flexibility. We might call it something more honest. Your metabolism becomes lazy. Not broken, not diseased, just deeply, stubbornly specialized for one way of operating. And then someone decides to start intermittent fasting. Here's what most people believe happens when they skip breakfast on day 1 of a fast. The body, sensing no incoming food, shrugs elegantly, flips a switch, and begins dissolving fat reserves like a well-oiled machine. The biological reality is far more interesting and significantly more uncomfortable. What actually happens is closer to a city experiencing a grid emergency for the first time in years, desperately trying to remember where it buried its backup generators. In the first hours of a fast, roughly the first 12 hours, your body is still drawing down those glycogen battery reserves in the liver. Insulin levels are falling. The power surge from your last meal is fading. And your brain, which consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy, despite being only 2% of your body weight, begins to notice. It sends distress signals. Hunger rises, concentration wavers, a subtle irritability sets in. If you make it past 12 to 16 hours, something incredible happens. Glycogen stores become genuinely depleted, and the body, with no other choice, begins unlocking the fat tanks. Specialized enzymes begin breaking triglycerides, fat molecules, into fatty acids and glycerol. The liver begins converting some of these into ketone bodies, an alternative fuel that your brain can run on surprisingly well. But here's the critical detail that most fasting content glosses over. This switch doesn't happen cleanly, not in the beginning. Because your fat-burning machinery has been idle for years, it's slow, inefficient. Like trying to start an ancient steam engine that hasn't been fired up in a decade. The pistons grind, the pressure takes time to build, and in that grinding transitional gap between glucose and fat burning, you feel terrible. Fatigue that seems disproportionate to anything you've done. A strange cognitive fog that makes simple tasks feel oddly effortful. Headaches, mild dizziness, an almost philosophical despair about whether any of this is worth it. This isn't your body failing. This is your body learning. This is biological adaptation in real time. The fat-burning enzymes upregulating, the mitochondria restructuring to handle new fuel types, the entire metabolic machinery being rewired for flexibility. Scientists call this adaptation period metabolic reprogramming. We might call it boot camp, because like any boot camp, it's temporary, purposeful, and designed to produce a fundamentally more capable version of what went in. The duration? For most people, 2 to 3 weeks of consistent fasting before the machinery begins running smoothly. Before the morning fog lifts and the energy stabilizes and something remarkable starts to emerge. The ability to go 8, 10, 12 hours without food and feel fine. Clear-headed even. This is metabolic flexibility, a genuine biological skill, rebuilt from the ground up. But during those first weeks, you'll also be negotiating with a tiny, powerful biochemical character who has enormous influence over your choices. Meet ghrelin. Ghrelin is a peptide hormone, a small chain of amino acids manufactured primarily in the stomach lining, and its job, its entire evolutionary purpose, is to tell your brain that it's time to eat. Think of it as a tiny, insistent alarm system, wired directly to your hypothalamus. When ghrelin levels spike, hunger spikes with it. And here's the fascinating, slightly maddening part. Ghrelin doesn't just respond to an empty stomach. It responds to habit, to time, to expectation. Your ghrelin alarm has been programmed over years of habitual eating to fire at specific times of day. It fires at 7 a.m. if you always eat breakfast. It fires at noon, precisely, because lunch has always been at noon. It fires with eerie punctuality because your biology has learned to anticipate meals, preparing your digestive system in advance. This is why skipping breakfast on day 1 doesn't just make you a little hungry. It makes you urgently, almost desperately hungry right on schedule. Your body's biochemistry is staging a protest. But here's what ghrelin doesn't tell you. Hunger is not a wall. It's a wave. Ghrelin spikes, and then if you don't eat, it retreats. Within 15 to 20 minutes, the wave passes. Your brain, receiving no meal signal, recalibrates. The urgency dissolves into something manageable, even ignorable. And each time you let a wave pass without feeding it, you're slowly, methodically reprogramming when and how intensely ghrelin fires. Within 2 to 3 weeks, many people report something almost counterintuitive. They're genuinely not hungry during what used to be urgent mealtime. The alarm has been recalibrated. There is, however, a second kind of hunger, one that ghrelin has almost nothing to do with. When you're stressed, bored, lonely, or anxious, your brain, specifically the reward circuitry in your limbic system, begins seeking dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of anticipation and reward, and eating is one of the fastest, most reliable ways to trigger it. A bite of something sweet or salty causes a small but immediate dopamine release. The brain notes this and begins generating what feels indistinguishable from hunger as a prompt to do it again. This is not weakness. This is neurochemistry. But it means that not every feeling of hunger during a fast is a genuine metabolic signal. Some of it is your reward circuitry lobbying for a dopamine hit with a sensation deliberately designed to feel like physical need. Learning to distinguish between these two signals, the metabolic alarm of ghrelin and the emotional lobbying of the reward system, is perhaps the most important psychological skill in fasting. No biological system operates in isolation, and fasting is no different. Think of the practice not as a single tower of willpower standing alone, but as one corner of a 3-pillared fortress. Remove any single pillar, and the entire structure becomes compromised. The 3 pillars are sleep, hydration, and nutrition. Let's begin with sleep, because sleep is not a passive state. It's one of the most metabolically active and hormonally critical periods in your biology. When you sleep poorly, fewer than 6 to 7 hours, or sleep that's fragmented and shallow, your adrenal glands respond by elevating cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol signals the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream. It's an ancient survival response. Stress means danger. Danger means you might need to run. Running requires fuel. The result? You wake from poor sleep with already elevated blood sugar and elevated cortisol. The cortisol then directly stimulates ghrelin release and suppresses leptin, the hormone responsible for signaling fullness. You are biochemically primed for hunger, for craving, for reaching for the densest, most calorie-rich food available. Sleep, in the architecture of fasting, is load-bearing infrastructure. The second pillar, hydration, and specifically, electrolyte balance. In the first days of fasting and carbohydrate reduction, glycogen begins to be depleted. And here's the physics of it. Every gram of glycogen is stored alongside roughly 3 to 4 grams of water. As glycogen depletes, all that water is released. You lose it rapidly through urine and respiration. And dissolved in that water are electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium, the charged ions that govern nerve signaling, muscle contraction, and fluid balance at the cellular level. When these drop, the symptoms are unmistakable. Headaches that throb behind the eyes, a fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, muscle cramps, dizziness when you stand too quickly. These are not signs that fasting is harming you. They're the straightforward consequences of mineral loss, and they're almost entirely preventable. A pinch of salt in water, foods rich in potassium, avocados, leafy greens, nuts, magnesium supplementation in the evening. The fortress doesn't crumble from grand dramatic failures. It crumbles from small, preventable mineral deficiencies that nobody mentioned. The third pillar, nutrition quality. Breaking a fast is a moment of acute biological sensitivity. After hours of low insulin and metabolic recalibration, your cells are primed to respond strongly to incoming nutrients. Break that fast with whole foods, proteins, healthy fats, complex carbohydrates, fiber, and the insulin response is measured, gradual, sustainable. Break it with ultra-processed foods, designed to maximize palatability and caloric density, and the insulin spike is dramatic, rapid, and destabilizing. That spike drives blood sugar up sharply, and then down sharply, and that crash is the sensation most people describe as being starving again 2 hours after eating. It's the biochemical setup for the next overeating episode. It makes tomorrow's fast harder. The quality of what you eat during your eating window is a direct detriment of the biological difficulty of the fast itself. There is a seductive trap in the culture around fasting that's worth naming directly. The trap is that the numbers become the point. The 16-hour window, the 20-hour window, the 1 meal a day protocol. These become status symbols, identity markers, a kind of metabolic scorekeeping. And in the pursuit of adherence to a specific window, people begin ignoring the very signals their biology is sending. Here's what the science actually says. There's no perfect fasting window. There is no protocol universally superior to all others, validated across all bodies, all lifestyles, all stress environments. The 16-8 window that works beautifully for a well-rested person becomes a cortisol-spiking stress multiplier for someone sleeping 5 hours and managing genuine life chaos. The biological reality is far more interesting than a number. Your body has a circadian rhythm, a deeply embedded, 24-hour biological clock that governs hormone secretion, cell repair, metabolic rate, and cognitive function with extraordinary precision. The most effective fasting protocol is one that aligns with this rhythm, fits your actual life, and is sustainable across months rather than days. And sustainability returns us to perhaps the most underrated factor: why you're doing this. Not the surface answer, not to lose weight or to feel better. The deeper answer. The one that will still make sense at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday when you've had 4 hours of sleep and there are donuts in the break room. Without a deep, considered, personal answer to that question, fasting is just hunger with a schedule. Every wave of ghrelin becomes an argument. Every headache becomes evidence that the whole thing's a mistake. The minor discomforts, which are temporary, manageable, and biologically meaningful, become easy excuses to abandon something that hasn't yet had time to work. But with a real answer, something rooted in who you want to be, how you want to feel, what you want your relationship with food to become, those same discomforts transform. They become data. They become the sensation of your body changing, the ancient steam engine finally firing up. And this, ultimately, is what intermittent fasting is really offering. It's offering you a relationship with hunger that is chosen rather than reactive. A moment each day where instead of immediately answering every craving, you pause and ask, is this what my body actually needs? Or is this just the pattern I inherited? For 99% of human history, hunger was a constant companion. It shaped our biology, our social structures, our relationship to food as something precious and communal and meaningful. We've spent 60 years trying to eliminate it entirely, and the elimination has not made us healthier or happier or more free. The biological skill of hunger, the capacity to feel it, understand it, and move through it with intention rather than panic, is not a punishment from a more difficult time. It's an inheritance, one your cells are still perfectly capable of using. You just have to give them the chance to remember how.